The bullet was 3 feet from the little girl's chest when the blonde waitress launched herself through the air. Her red and black uniform billowed as she twisted mid-flight with military precision, her body becoming a human shield. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the restaurant like thunder. Blood bloomed across her white apron. "She's going to die," the child whispered, her dark eyes wide with terror. Every patron in Romano's froze, crystal glasses suspended halfway to lips. Conversations died mid-sentence, but the man who watched this impossible act of heroism was no ordinary restaurant owner. Don Salvatore Romano was the most feared Mafia boss in New York, and what he had just witnessed would shatter everything he thought he knew about the woman who had served his family dinner every Tuesday for 8 months. Stay with me until the end, because this story will prove that sometimes the deadliest enemies make the most unlikely heroes. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. It was a humid Thursday evening in Little Italy, Manhattan, and the summer of 2019 felt like it might never end. Romano's restaurant occupied the corner of Mulberry and Hester, its warm, golden light spilling onto sidewalks where tourists snapped photos and locals hurried past with practiced indifference. Inside the elegant establishment, white tablecloths gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the scent of garlic and fresh basil drifted from the kitchen like an invitation to forget the outside world existed. This wasn't just any restaurant. This was Don Salvatore Romano's kingdom, where handshake deals worth millions were conducted over plates of homemade linguine, where senators called to pay their respects, where rival families sent tribute rather than risk his displeasure. Every waiter understood the unspoken rules. Every customer knew to keep their voices low and their business discreet. And every employee had been vetted with the kind of thoroughness usually reserved for presidential cabinet appointments. Don Salvatore Romano sat at his usual corner table, a man whose 62 years had only sharpened his legendary presence. His silver hair was perfectly styled despite the heat. His dark suit cost more than most people earned in 3 months. When he spoke, grown men leaned forward to catch every word. When he smiled, which was rare, it meant either great fortune or terrible misfortune for someone. Tonight, like every Thursday for the past 2 years, he was having dinner with the most precious thing in his world. 7-year-old Isabella Romano possessed her grandfather's dark eyes and her late mother's gentle spirit. She sat across from him in a white summer dress, chattering about her ballet recital while carefully twirling pasta around her fork. Salvatore watched her with an expression that would have surprised his enemies. Here was a man who controlled half of Manhattan's underground economy, who had built an empire on fear and respect, who could end careers with a phone call. Yet with Isabella, he became something unrecognizable. He became soft. The child was the only family he had left. His son, Isabella's father, had been killed in a car bombing intended for Salvatore himself. His daughter-in-law had died of a broken heart 6 months later. Isabella was all that remained of his bloodline, the single bright spot in a life built on calculated violence. She was also his greatest vulnerability, and Salvatore knew it. The dinner service flowed around them with practiced efficiency. Romano's employed only the most experienced staff, people who understood that excellence wasn't optional when serving the Romano family. The head chef had trained in Milan. The sommelier spoke 4 languages. The servers moved like dancers, anticipating needs before they were voiced. But tonight, Salvatore's attention kept drifting to the blonde waitress who had been working there for 8 months. Natasha Stevens had appeared on their doorstep the previous autumn, a 28-year-old woman with a Midwest accent and references that checked out perfectly. She claimed to be from Ohio, had restaurant experience in Cleveland, and needed a fresh start in New York after a difficult divorce. Her application was flawless. Her background was clean. Her smile was warm and professional. What made her unusual wasn't her story. It was her complete lack of fear around him. Most employees maintained a careful distance from the Romano family table. They served quickly and efficiently, then melted back into the restaurant's rhythm without lingering. But Natasha was different. She chatted easily with Isabella about school and friends. She remembered exactly how Salvatore liked his espresso. She moved through the dining room with a confidence that seemed natural, unrehearsed. Tonight she approached their table carrying Isabella's favorite dessert, tiramisu with extra chocolate shavings. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her red and black uniform was immaculate, despite the dinner rush. She set the plate in front of Isabella with a flourish that made the little girl giggle. "Extra chocolate, just like you requested, Signorina Isabella," Natasha said, with a slight bow that was playful rather than servile. Isabella clapped her hands in delight. "Grazie, Natasha. Did you know my grandfather built this whole restaurant just so I could have the best tiramisu in New York?" Natasha's eyes met Salvatore's across the table. "Is that so? Well then, your grandfather must love you very much." There was something in her gaze that Salvatore couldn't quite identify. Not the nervous deference he was accustomed to, nor the calculating interest of people who wanted something from him. Just a steady, measured attention that suggested she was paying closer attention to everything than most people realized. "She's my whole world," Salvatore said quietly, his hand reaching across to ruffle Isabella's dark curls. "I would do anything to protect her." Natasha nodded as if she understood completely. "Family is everything," she agreed. "Without it, what do any of us really have?" The sincerity in her voice caught Salvatore off guard. For just a moment, she didn't sound like a waitress making conversation. She sounded like someone who had lost family herself, who understood the weight of being responsible for someone you couldn't bear to lose. The moment passed as quickly as it had arrived. Natasha smiled, asked if they needed anything else, then glided back toward the kitchen to handle her other tables. Salvatore watched her go, noting details he hadn't consciously registered before. The way she moved with perfect balance, even in heels. The way her eyes constantly scanned the room, cataloguing faces and exits. The way she positioned herself near walls, rather than in the center of open spaces. You see, Salvatore Romano hadn't survived 62 years in his line of work by ignoring instincts. And his instincts were telling him that Natasha Stevens was hiding something significant beneath her friendly Midwest exterior. What he didn't know was that those instincts were absolutely correct. The woman serving his granddaughter dessert was actually Agent Natasha Volkov, a decorated CIA operative with 17 confirmed kills and expertise in deep cover operations. She had been embedded at Romano's for 8 months as part of Operation Clean Sweep, a federal task force aimed at dismantling the Romano crime family once and for all. Natasha had been chosen for this assignment because of her unique combination of skills and background. Fluent in 6 languages, trained in advanced combat techniques, and possessing an almost supernatural ability to blend into any environment. She was also the daughter of Russian immigrants, which gave her an intuitive understanding of old-world family loyalty and honor codes. The FBI needed someone who could get close to Salvatore Romano without triggering the paranoid security measures that had kept him untouchable for decades. The mission was supposed to be straightforward. Gain employment at Romano's restaurant, establish trust with the Romano family, gather intelligence about their operations, document evidence of criminal activity, maintain cover until federal agents could build an airtight case for prosecution. What wasn't supposed to happen was Isabella Romano capturing Natasha's heart completely. The 7-year-old reminded Natasha of her younger sister Anya, who had died in a car accident when Natasha was 23. Isabella had the same fearless laugh, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking, the same stubborn insistence on adding extra chocolate to everything. Watching Salvatore with his granddaughter reminded Natasha of her own grandfather, who had raised her after her parents died and who had taught her that protecting family was the only thing that mattered in the world. For 8 months, Natasha had been gathering evidence while fighting an internal war between her mission and her growing attachment to the people she was supposed to destroy. She had documented financial records, photographed important meetings, recorded conversations that would put Salvatore behind bars for life. Her handlers were pleased with her progress. The case was nearly complete. But tonight, as she watched Isabella laugh over her tiramisu while her grandfather's eyes softened with love, Natasha felt the familiar twist of guilt in her chest. These weren't the monsters the FBI had described in her briefings. Yes, Salvatore Romano was dangerous. Yes, he had blood on his hands. But he was also a grandfather who remembered his granddaughter's favorite dessert, who held her hand during thunderstorms, who read her bedtime stories about brave princesses and loyal knights. Natasha was so lost in these conflicted thoughts that she almost missed the first sign of trouble. Vincent Torino entered Romano's at 8:47 that evening, followed by two men in dark suits who kept their hands inside their jackets. Natasha noticed them immediately because she noticed everyone who came through the door. It was part of her training and part of her survival instinct. But something about these three men made her internal alarms start ringing. Vincent Torino was Salvatore's younger brother and the black sheep of the Romano family. Where Salvatore had built his empire through strategy and careful alliances, Vincent had always preferred violence and intimidation. The two brothers had maintained an uneasy peace for years, but recent intelligence suggested that Vincent was planning to make a move for control of the family operations. Natasha moved closer to the Romano table, positioning herself to intervene if necessary, while maintaining the illusion of simply clearing nearby tables. Her hand brushed against the kitchen knife she kept concealed beneath her apron, a habit that had saved her life twice in previous assignments. Vincent approached his brother's table with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Isabella looked up from her dessert and waved enthusiastically. "Uncle Vincent, did you come to have dinner with us?" "Ciao, bella Isabella," Vincent replied, but his attention was fixed on Salvatore. "Brother, we need to discuss the Martinelli situation." Salvatore's expression hardened slightly. "This is family time, Vincent. Business can wait until tomorrow." "I'm afraid it can't," Vincent said, his voice carrying an edge that made several nearby diners look up nervously. "The Martinellis want an answer tonight." What happened next unfolded in slow motion, each second stretching like minutes as training and instinct took over Natasha's consciousness. Vincent's hand moved toward his jacket. Salvatore's bodyguards, positioned throughout the restaurant, began to react. Isabella continued eating her tiramisu, oblivious to the tension building around her. Natasha calculated angles and distances, her mind automatically running through tactical scenarios she had practiced thousands of times. The first gunshot came not from Vincent, but from the kitchen entrance where one of his associates had positioned himself. The bullet was aimed not at Salvatore, but at Isabella. Vincent's plan was more twisted than anyone had anticipated. He wasn't here to kill his brother cleanly. He was here to destroy Salvatore's world by taking away the one thing he loved more than life itself. Time crystallized into perfect clarity for Natasha, the bullet traveling toward Isabella's chest, the little girl's confused expression as chaos erupted around her, Salvatore's face transforming from confusion to horror as he realized what was happening. The knowledge that she could save this child, but only by revealing skills that no waitress should possess. Natasha didn't hesitate. She launched herself across 6 feet of space with the kind of precision that came from years of combat training. Her body moved with balletic grace, twisting in midair to intercept the bullet's path. She felt the impact as the slug tore through her shoulder, spinning her sideways as she crashed into Isabella's chair and drove them both to the floor behind the solid oak table. The restaurant erupted into screaming chaos. More gunshots, shattering glass, the sound of chairs and tables overturning as patrons dove for cover. Salvatore's security team returned fire with military precision, their weapons appearing as if by magic. Vincent's men found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered within seconds, but all of that faded into background noise for Natasha as she lay on the marble floor, her body shielding Isabella while blood seeped through her white apron. The little girl was crying but alive, her dark eyes wide with terror and confusion. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Natasha whispered, her voice steady despite the fire in her shoulder. "Are you hurt anywhere?" Isabella shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're bleeding. You're bleeding everywhere." "I'm going to be fine," Natasha lied gently. "Just stay down and don't move until your grandfather says it's safe." The gunfight lasted less than 30 seconds. When the echoes faded, Vincent Torino lay dead near the kitchen entrance, along with both of his associates. Salvatore's security team had executed a perfect defensive action, but their boss wasn't thinking about tactics or victory. He was staring at the blonde waitress who had just taken a bullet meant for his granddaughter. Natasha tried to sit up, her hand pressed against her wounded shoulder. Blood was flowing freely now, soaking through her uniform and pooling on the white marble floor. But her eyes were alert and focused, scanning the restaurant for additional threats with the kind of professional assessment that made Salvatore's breath catch in his throat. "Isabella," Salvatore said urgently, dropping to his knees beside them. "Are you hurt? Did they hurt you?" "I'm okay, Nonno," Isabella sobbed, reaching for her grandfather while staying close to Natasha. "She saved me. She flew through the air like a superhero." Salvatore's eyes met Natasha's over his granddaughter's head. What he saw there confirmed every suspicion he had been harboring for months. This wasn't shock or panic. This was the calm, measured assessment of a professional who had been in situations like this before. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice carrying depths of emotion that few people had ever heard from him. "You saved her life." Natasha nodded slightly, wincing as the movement sent fresh pain through her shoulder. Anyone would have done the same thing. But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't true. The movement she had just executed required training, reflexes, and split-second decision-making that couldn't be learned from waitressing manuals. She had blown her cover completely, and there was no taking it back. Salvatore's personal physician arrived within minutes, a discreet man who asked no questions and provided medical care with Swiss efficiency. As he examined Natasha's wound, Salvatore watched her face for any sign of deception or calculation. Instead, he saw only genuine concern for Isabella, who refused to leave Natasha's side despite multiple attempts to coax her away. "The bullet passed through cleanly," Dr. Mendez reported quietly. "No bone damage, no arterial involvement. She was very lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Salvatore murmured, still studying Natasha's face. That was skill. As the restaurant was cleared and the crime scene processed by Salvatore's people rather than the authorities, Natasha found herself in the unusual position of being both patient and prisoner. She was moved to a private room above the restaurant, where Isabella insisted on staying with her, while her shoulder was properly cleaned and bandaged. The little girl sat on the edge of the bed, holding Natasha's uninjured hand and chattering nervously about everything, except what had just happened. She talked about school, about her dance lessons, about the stray cat she had been feeding in the alley behind their apartment building. But her voice carried the brittle edge of someone trying very hard not to think about frightening things. Salvatore watched this interaction from a chair beside the window, his mind working through implications and possibilities. His granddaughter had bonded with this woman over the course of 8 months, sharing stories and secrets the way children did with adults they trusted completely. Now this same woman had risked her life without hesitation to protect Isabella from a bullet meant to destroy his world. But the movement Natasha had made wasn't instinctive. It was trained, professional. The kind of reflexive action that came from years of combat experience. After Dr. Mendez finished his work, and Isabella finally fell asleep, curled up beside Natasha on the narrow bed, Salvatore pulled his chair closer and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" he asked. Natasha met his gaze steadily. Her cover was blown. Her mission was compromised. Everything she had worked for over the past 8 months was destroyed. But looking at Isabella sleeping peacefully beside her, she found she didn't care about any of that as much as she should have. "Someone who couldn't let a child die," she said simply. "That's not an answer," Salvatore replied, but his tone carried curiosity rather than anger. "In 40 years of this business, I've never seen anyone move like that. Military training, special forces maybe, or something else entirely." Natasha was quiet for a long moment, listening to Isabella's soft breathing and weighing her options. She could continue the charade, claim she had just gotten lucky. But Salvatore Romano wasn't stupid, and insulting his intelligence at this point would only make things worse. "Something else entirely," she said finally. Salvatore leaned back in his chair, processing this admission. "Federal? Does it matter?" Natasha asked. "I just saved your granddaughter's life." "That matters because I need to understand what happens next," Salvatore said. 8 months ago, you appeared in my restaurant with perfect credentials and a flawless backstory. Tonight, you took a bullet for my family. Either you're the most dedicated undercover agent in history, or something has changed about your mission." Natasha looked down at Isabella, who had shifted in her sleep to curl closer against Natasha's uninjured side. The little girl's face was peaceful now, her earlier terror replaced by the natural resilience of childhood. She trusted Natasha completely, and that trust felt more valuable than any intelligence she had gathered. "Something changed," Natasha admitted quietly. "What changed?" Natasha was quiet for so long that Salvatore thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of emotion that surprised him. "I had a sister once," she said. "She was 7 years old when she died. Car accident. I was supposed to be watching her, but I was at college, studying for finals, building my career. I thought there would always be more time." She touched Isabella's dark hair gently, her fingers trembling slightly from blood loss and exhaustion. "When I took this assignment, they briefed me on your criminal activities, your organization's involvement in trafficking, money laundering, violence. They told me you were a monster who needed to be stopped, but they didn't tell me about this." She gestured toward Isabella with her free hand. "They didn't tell me about Thursday dinners and extra chocolate and bedtime stories. They didn't tell me you built this whole restaurant around making one little girl feel safe and loved. They didn't tell me that destroying you would destroy her too." Salvatore absorbed this revelation in silence. For 8 months, he had been harboring a federal agent in his inner circle. She had access to everything: financial records, private conversations, strategic planning sessions. She could have destroyed his empire 10 times over with the intelligence she had gathered. Instead, she had taken a bullet for his granddaughter. "What was your mission?" he asked. "Gather enough evidence to put you away for life," Natasha said without hesitation. "Your entire organization, everyone involved. How close are you to completing that mission?" Natasha's laugh held no humor. "I completed it months ago. I have enough evidence to convict you, your lieutenants, and half the city government. Everything is documented, recorded, photographed." The admission hung in the air between them like a challenge. Salvatore had just learned that his destruction was not only possible, but inevitable. Yet the woman who held that power was currently using her body as a pillow for his granddaughter. "Why haven't you turned it in?" he asked. "Because 3 months ago, Isabella asked me if I thought her grandfather was a good man," Natasha said quietly. "She said some kids at school told her you were a bad person, but she didn't believe them because you always remembered to cut the crusts off her sandwiches exactly the way she liked them." Natasha's eyes filled with tears she had been holding back since the shooting. How was I supposed to explain to her that the man who reads her bedtime stories and remembers her favorite songs is the same man the government wants to lock away forever? How was I supposed to tell her that the person who makes her feel safest in the world is considered one of the most dangerous criminals in New York? Salvatore understood then what had changed about her mission. It wasn't just about gathering intelligence anymore. It had become about protecting a little girl from the truth that would shatter her world completely. "So what happens now?" he asked. Before Natasha could answer, her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her handler. The text was brief and to the point. "Situation compromised. Extract immediately. Use backup exit protocol 7. The CIA had been monitoring the situation at Romano's through multiple sources. They knew about the shooting, about Natasha's blown cover, about her current location. Her handler was demanding immediate extraction before her position became untenable. But looking at Isabella sleeping peacefully against her side, Natasha made a decision that surprised even her. She deleted the message without responding. "Now," she said to Salvatore, "I guess we figure out what matters more, justice or family." Over the next week, as Natasha recovered from her gunshot wound in the secure apartment above Romano's restaurant, an unusual dynamic developed between the federal agent and the Mafia boss. Isabella refused to leave Natasha's side for more than a few hours at a time, insisting on reading to her, bringing her meals, and providing running commentary about everything happening in her 7-year-old world. Salvatore found himself in the unprecedented position of being grateful to a law enforcement officer. Not just grateful, but genuinely respectful of someone who had put his granddaughter's life above their professional obligations. He also found himself sharing stories about his life, his family, his motivations that he had never discussed with anyone outside his immediate circle. "You want to know the truth about my business?" he asked one evening as they sat in the small living room, while Isabella practiced piano in the next room. 90% of what we do is protection, real protection, keeping drugs out of school zones, making sure widows can keep their family businesses without being harassed by loan sharks, providing security for people the police can't or won't help. Natasha listened without judgment, recognizing the rationalization, but also hearing the genuine conviction in his voice. "What about the other 10%?" she asked. Salvatore's expression darkened. "The other 10% is what keeps the 90% possible. Sometimes you have to make deals with devils to protect angels. And the trafficking, the money laundering." "Numbers on paper," Salvatore said dismissively. "Financial arrangements that allow us to fund legitimate businesses and community programs. When was the last time you saw a homeless veteran on the streets of Little Italy? When was the last time you heard about a senior citizen getting mugged within 6 blocks of this restaurant?" Natasha had to admit that his neighborhood was remarkably safe compared to other areas of Manhattan. The streets were clean. Local businesses thrived. Families felt secure walking home after dark. Whether this was coincidence or the result of Salvatore's influence was difficult to determine. "You're asking me to believe you're some kind of benevolent dictator," she said. "I'm asking you to believe that the world isn't as simple as your government briefings made it seem," Salvatore replied. "I'm asking you to consider that destroying me might not make Isabella's world safer or better." It was a fair point, and one that Natasha had been wrestling with for months. The intelligence she had gathered painted a complex picture of an organization that operated outside the law, but according to its own strict moral code. Yes, there was violence. Yes, there was corruption. But there was also genuine community protection, family loyalty, and a kind of justice that the formal legal system couldn't always provide. Meanwhile, her handler's messages were becoming increasingly urgent. The CIA wanted their asset extracted immediately. They were threatening to send a recovery team if she didn't respond soon. They were questioning her mental state, her loyalty, her fitness for duty. All valid concerns from their perspective. But from Natasha's perspective, sitting in this small apartment watching a 7-year-old girl practice piano while her grandfather listened with quiet pride, the situation felt more complicated than any government briefing had prepared her for. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when Isabella woke up screaming from a nightmare about bullets and blood. Natasha held her while she sobbed, rocking her gently and whispering reassurances that everything was safe now. "I was so scared you were going to die," Isabella whispered against Natasha's chest. "I was so scared you were going to leave me like Mama and Papa did." And in that moment, Natasha understood that this wasn't about justice versus family anymore. It was about choosing to protect what was innocent and precious in a world full of compromise and moral complexity. She made her decision. That afternoon, while Isabella was at school and Salvatore was handling business in the restaurant below, Natasha called her handler for the final time. "Agent Volkov, thank God," came the immediate response. "We've been trying to reach you for days. What's your status, sir?" "My status is compromised beyond recovery," Natasha said calmly. "I'm requesting immediate termination of Operation Clean Sweep." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Explain," her handler said finally. "The situation has evolved beyond the parameters of the original mission," Natasha replied, using the bureaucratic language that would be easier for them to process than emotional explanations. "Continuing this operation would result in significant collateral damage to innocent civilians." "You mean the granddaughter?" "I mean a 7-year-old girl who has already lost both parents and shouldn't have to lose the only family she has left, because we decided her grandfather is inconvenient for our strategic objectives." "Agent Volkov, you are not thinking clearly. You've been undercover too long. You're suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. We're sending a recovery team to extract you immediately." "If you send anyone to extract me," Natasha said quietly, "I will consider it a hostile action and respond accordingly. I am resigning from the agency, effective immediately." "You can't resign in the middle of an active operation. That's treason." "Then arrest me," Natasha said, "but leave Isabella Romano out of it." She hung up the phone and destroyed it, knowing that she had just burned every bridge that connected her to her old life. She was now officially a rogue agent, someone who had chosen family over duty, love over law. When Salvatore returned that evening, he found Natasha and Isabella making dinner together in the small kitchen. Their heads bent over a cookbook while they debated the proper amount of garlic for the marinara sauce. It was such a domestic scene that it took him a moment to process the significance of what he was seeing. "You're staying," he said. It wasn't a question. "If you'll have me," Natasha replied. "Not as an agent, not as a threat, just as someone who loves your granddaughter and wants to help keep her safe." Salvatore looked at Isabella, who was stirring the sauce with intense concentration. Then back at Natasha. 8 months ago, she had entered his world as an enemy. Tonight, she was asking to become family. "What about your evidence?" he asked. "The intelligence you gathered." Natasha gestured toward the small laptop on the kitchen counter. "Everything is on there, every file, every recording, every photograph. Do with it whatever you think is best." Salvatore walked to the laptop and opened it, scrolling through months of meticulous documentation. Financial records that could destroy his empire, recorded conversations that could put him in prison for life, photographs that could implicate dozens of associates and allies. 8 months of his destruction, compiled by someone who had risked her life to save his granddaughter. He closed the laptop and deleted everything. "Welcome to the family," he said. 2 years later, Natasha stood in the kitchen of Romano's restaurant wearing a chef's coat instead of a waitress uniform, preparing Isabella's favorite birthday cake. She had discovered a talent for cooking that surprised everyone, including herself. Her marinara sauce had become legendary among the restaurant's regular customers. Isabella, now 9 years old and more confident than ever, bounced between the kitchen and the dining room, supervising party preparations with the authority of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. She spoke to the waitstaff in rapid Italian, checked flower arrangements with a critical eye, and reminded everyone that the birthday cake needed extra chocolate because that was simply how things were done in the Romano family. Salvatore watched his girls work together with an expression of quiet contentment. Natasha had kept her word completely. She had become not just Isabella's protector, but her mentor, friend, and surrogate mother. She had also become something Salvatore had never expected to find again at his age. She had become the daughter he had lost, the family member who understood both his love for Isabella and the complexity of the world they lived in. The CIA had made a few half-hearted attempts to reclaim their rogue agent over the past 2 years, but Natasha's transformation into a civilian had been so complete that pursuing her became more trouble than it was worth. Officially, Agent Natasha Volkov had died in a training accident. Unofficially, a woman named Natasha Romano had been born into a family that would protect her with the same ferocity they brought to all family matters. "Aunt Tasha," Isabella called from the dining room. "The flowers are perfect, but I think we need more balloons." "More balloons it is, Principessa," Natasha replied, wiping flour from her hands and heading toward the party supply closet. As she passed Salvatore, he caught her hand gently. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Natasha looked through the kitchen doorway at Isabella, who was now rearranging chairs to ensure everyone would have the perfect view for cake cutting. The little girl's laughter filled the restaurant with warmth that no amount of money or power could buy. "Only one," Natasha said. "I wish I had found you both sooner." And as the Romano family prepared to celebrate another year of Isabella's life, surrounded by the chosen family that had formed around love rather than blood, Natasha understood that sometimes the most important missions were the ones you never saw coming. Sometimes the greatest victory was abandoning everything you thought you wanted for something you never knew you needed. Sometimes the deadliest enemy could become the fiercest protector, and sometimes the only way to serve justice was to choose mercy instead. The little girl who had almost lost everything had gained a guardian angel who would never leave her side. The Mafia boss who had built his life on control had learned to trust completely. And the federal agent who had dedicated her life to serving her country had discovered that sometimes the highest form of service was serving the people you love. In a world full of complicated choices and moral compromises, they had found something pure and simple and true. They had found family. Thanks for watching. And remember to subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove love is stronger than any law and family is worth any sacrifice.